Good afternoon. So hello and welcome to another one of our webinars. My name is Tammy. I work with the Teaching Quality Department, and my co-host, as always, is Rose today. So she'll be taking any comments. Please feel free to use the chat box and comments, and we can use these at the end in our Q&A, but also as we go through as and when is necessary. So today, our subject is swipe left or swipe right, the do's and don'ts in online teaching. So many people have taught in real life classrooms for a long time, and then they come to teach online teaching often as ESL teachers, and there are some really big differences. I know when I moved from in real life classrooms to online teaching, I had a lot to learn. So hopefully we can do that today, and we can help one another with this. So what we're going to do today, we're going to look at the 5 do's of online teaching and the 5 don'ts of online teaching. There are probably many more, but these are the most important ones that we need to remember to do or not to do. We're going to compare online versus in real life teaching and learning. We'll have a quick look at the growth mindset and its benefit for online students, and how we as teachers can encourage that. And at the end, we'll have time for a Q&A. So keep those questions coming. Okay, so let's start with a quote. So there can be infinite uses of computer and of new age technology, but if teachers themselves are not able to bring it into the classroom and make it work, then it fails. So if we don't know how to use an online classroom, not only will we let ourselves down, we will impede our teaching, and therefore our students won't be able to make any kind of progress, and it will not be any enjoyment for them or for us. And as always, we want to promote an enjoyment of every lesson, not just for our students, but for us too. As teachers, we're passionate, we care about our students, young, teenagers, adults, whatever, and we want to pass that on. So we need to do that by knowing what we should and shouldn't do. Okay, so let's look at the first 5 do's of online teaching. So the first one, so to dress and present yourself appropriately. So before I say what we've got to say about this, what about you? What do you think is the reason for this? Why is this so important?
Well, I think we need to remember that majority of us are working from home, teaching online. And in this time that we've just been through, I think a lot of people are working from home, and it can be very daunting to work in your pajamas or really comfortable clothes that give you that feeling of relaxation, So I personally feel dressing and presenting yourself appropriately and professionally makes you, more motivated to work, comes across as you ready for the lesson,
Definitely.
At the end of the day, this is your job, so you have to dress the part.
Yes, I'd absolutely agree with you. It's important to make yourself feel ready and prepared. So it creates a professional image, like Rose said. It doesn't distract students. So that might seem a bit strange, but I've worked with many teachers over the years. The majority of them amazing teachers, dress very professionally, but I've also worked with amazing teachers who don't dress professionally. And I've worked with the students who talk about those teachers, not disrespectfully, but they notice, trust us, they notice, and they may say, oh, Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so, they're quite scruffy, aren't they? And it impacts. The student will often go to that lesson thinking, this isn't such an important lesson because my teacher isn't dressed. So you don't as professionally as maybe my other teacher. So you may think it doesn't matter, but it does. And I think it's really important what Rose said, it has an impact on us, on your self-confidence. But it is handy online. You can get away with pajama bottoms every now and then if you're having a bad day. But yes, it shows that you're looking and you're feeling prepared for lessons. Think about that first impression you're going to give to a student. With online teaching, particularly ESL, you may get regular students for a while and then they may come and go. You very often get new people. Think about that impression that you want to give them. It's the first thing they see is what you look like and what image are you creating for them. So our second do, to have a positive energy in your online lesson. I'm sure we have all been in those lessons with a teacher who is really boring. They may be a lovely teacher. They may really know their subject, but there's no passion, there's no energy, and you will remember them because maybe they were a bit dull, but you probably won't remember what they taught. What about you, Rose? Why do you think this is such an important aspect?
I think it's important because, you know, we're working in a virtual classroom. There's no physical contact, or you're not physically in a classroom with the students or a one-to-one lesson. So energy is so important for engagement, you know, for interaction, for just keeping that student motivated to learn, you know, in the virtual classroom. And I also think it's important that we need to be aware of our energy levels for different students. You know, younger students, you know, would do well with a lot of energy while teaching, and actions and gestures and TPR. But a teenage student might not need as much energy in the classroom. You know, they've got more learning experience. They've been through, you know, a couple of years of learning already. Yeah. So I think it's important for us to also be aware of our energy levels with different students when we're working in a virtual classroom.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with all of that, 100%. So to carry on from that, really, it creates a fun learning environment. We want our students to come to our lessons wanting to come. Online lessons are a choice. So even if their parents have made that choice for them, their parents could also choose not to come to our lessons if they feel that this environment doesn't exist. By being fun, it doesn't mean that it's not professional, but it's a bit different with an online. You can be a bit more relaxed and have a bit more fun with them. It engages them. And if your student is engaged because you're popping, because you're bouncing and you're happy and energetic, then they will participate. I've noticed this a lot with very shy students. So they may be more reluctant to engage, but over time, because you're asking them questions, but they're in a fun, and then they're in an engaging way, they want to participate. They want to join in that fun. It helps them feel at ease, which helps us feel at ease. And it boosts their self-confidence. Just think about a student that comes into a lesson, has very little participation, is bored. How much self-confidence are they going to have, not just in what they've learned, but in their whole, in themselves in that particular time? We have a responsibility to do what we can to boost that. And by having a great positive energy, then we have to do that. Teaching is often about performance, and particularly online, because you're in a very limited space. There's you and maybe one student, in some occasions, maybe a group of students, but it's not like being in a classroom. So you're limited what you can do. So if your energy is down, and that can happen to all of us if we're not feeling well, but we need to perform to a level, not to entertain, but to engage and to educate. We're not entertaining children. We're doing what we can to help them be engaged with us and to participate. So this is really important, to know your online teaching platform. So when you are teaching online, you may well be working for a company. So make sure you know your company's policy about the teaching platform, what you can and can't do. If you are freelance, which many ESL teachers also are, whatever platform you're using, make sure you know it like the back of your hand. Why? Because if we're not familiar with what we can do in our classroom, then as simple as this sounds, we can't use it. So we can't use it to help our children, teenagers, adults, whoever that we're teaching. We can't conduct it to meet their needs. Every student is an individual. So you need to know, what can I use in the classroom that will work for this student? Okay, so for example, maybe you have a student who's very chatty. They love to talk, and it's difficult to focus them. If you know that your online classroom has a timer, for instance, as many do, you can prepare for that. So preparing and planning for your lesson. Right, I will use that timer with this particular student to say you can only talk for so long about this subject, and then we're going to go back to the lesson. But if you don't know that's there, or you don't know how to use it, then you could be floundering a little bit. So, and it's really important If you know your online platform, you know when it's not working correctly. And I'm sure if you're an online teacher who's had some experiences, this happens to everybody at times. You can go into your classroom, you're really prepared, you know exactly what you're going to do to the student, and something's not working. But you know it's not working, so you can deal with it. However your company, however you personally can deal with that, you know the procedures to do so. If you don't know it, then you're going to be drowning a little bit, and we would never want that. So it makes you comfortable, makes you absolutely sure. What about you, Rose? Have you got any other thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I would like to add, I had a student that, you know, loved to learn with a lot of visuals and hands-on learning, basically. So using the little virtual pen for him was amazing, you know. But again, you need to know that that function is there. You need to know how to use that function to meet that student's needs, you know. Without that, that lesson would have failed completely, because it wouldn't have engaged him. He would have shut down completely. So definitely. I think that's very important to know all your tools, know how they work, know how to use them. And then you can, again, adapt the lesson content to meet that student's needs and get the most out of the lesson. Because at the end of the day, that's what you want to do, you know?
Yeah, and I think I agree with all of that. And also being up to date. So if you're with a company, be up to date with any training. Classrooms change frequently because technology, as we said at the beginning of that quote, is always changing. But if we don't have to use it, we could fail our students. We'd never set out to do that, but that could happen. And can you imagine leaving a lesson thinking, oh, that was a bit of a disaster? We've all had disaster lessons, I'm sure. But it was a disaster because I wasn't prepared fully, because I didn't know how to access these things. I didn't know that this wasn't working properly. So preparation is key, and keeping up to date with any training your company may provide, or if you're freelance, keeping up to date with any updates and any training that you may be provided for the program that you're using. It's really essential. So create a quiet and comfortable teaching space. So let's open this up. Why do you think that this is such an important aspect of online teaching?
Well, I feel this is your space, you know, and you could have a whole days of lessons and you don't want to be uncomfortable and irritated, and you know that comes across to the student. I've traveled and I've still taught, and that's one of the many benefits of online teaching is you can do it from anywhere. But you know, you have to have a comfortable space to be able to conduct a successful lesson, in my opinion. I've been in very uncomfortable situations and have felt very uncomfortable while teaching, just purely because of my environment. And it definitely does come, you know, the student can pick that up, and definitely. you can't teach to your full potential when you are uncomfortable, or you're not feeling very prepared in your environment. So I think that can be very important in conducting a successful lesson and making sure that you're giving the most of yourself during this lesson.
Definitely. Even things like your headphones, which may sound silly, but you have lots of back-to-back lessons. Your headphones, if they're not comfortable, I know it sounds like very minor, but by the end of it, they can really hurt your ears if you've not got a good set. They don't have to be expensive. Mine are not expensive. And my chair. So I used to have quite a hard chair for a while, and eventually I moved to a much softer chair, and it made a difference. And it's obviously health as well. Okay. So we need to feel at ease when teaching. It creates an engaging environment. So if we create a classroom behind us, so we don't want bare walls. Think of how could we make an impression, so when our student first comes into the classroom, they're like, whoa, okay, this is a classroom. Let's make it educational. Let's make it interactive. So for instance, in my classroom behind, which you can't see, but I have lots of toys. I have posters, I have props everywhere, and it's neat, so it's not distracting. We would never want to make a distracting background, but it's interactive. So if I'm teaching animals, I can turn around and reach my big cow or my elephant. Or if I'm teaching toys, I can reach my teddy bear. And that is great for creating an interactive environment for your student as well, or your students, as long as it's neat and tidy. And for me personally, by the end of my teaching, my props, my flashcard, it's everywhere. I'm sure it's the same for you, Rose. By the end, but at the beginning, it's very neat and ordered. It means, and I know exactly where everything is and I can reach it. And there are still times when a prop has gone astray that was there 2 minutes before the lesson, but it's having that order and being comfortable, so you're at ease and you're ready and you know where everything is to hand. And again, preparation for that is key. When we say about having a quiet environment, that doesn't mean we can't be noisy and have fun, but we're in control of that. We can always bring it back. We also need to make sure that we are in a place in our house, so maybe with a family or housemates or friends or whatever, or like yourself, Rose, when you're traveling, please make sure that we are in a place that is not going to be disturbed. Whoever you are sharing your home with, they know not to come in, because that would be very unprofessional. Think about how that would look for the student. That's a really important thing.
Okay. Someone also mentioned that the fact of having a nice, environment full of color and teaching equipment can be very exciting for the students, which I totally agree with. It gives them that feeling of excitement, and they want to be there, they want to learn. And I mean, you can put yourself in that situation. Imagine you are just in a room with white walls, you wouldn't feel very motivated to learn anything. So that was a great point that somebody made.
I love color. We all love color. The world is colorful, isn't it? It's not black and white. The world is colorful, and we love it. So we can echo that in our classrooms. So number 5, this really ties in with what we're saying about an interactive classroom as well. So use extra visuals and props or relia. So relia are could be literally if you're teaching by phone, so your actual phone, or pens, or you could even print pictures off, or even upload images into your classroom if your online classroom allows you to do that. So why is this so important? Because obviously it adds a visual element to the lesson. If you've got visual elements, it engages the students more. So many people can think, well, with props, that's just for little children or for younger children. It's not. You can use props for any age. I'm sure Rose is the same. I've used props for 3-year-olds. I've used props for adults. So a prop for a 3-year-old would be very different from a prop for an adult. But I have lots of toys for my younger ones, flashcards, so your simple words, your colour cards, things like this. But I also have a whiteboard. And I very often use my physical whiteboard, even though I can write on the classroom. It's another element to teach grammar structure or to sound out words and things. It's just another element, and it engages them more. You can even use the tools in your online classroom as props. It's a great way to self-correct. So it's particularly if you're teaching ESL students, if they say a sentence that's grammatically incorrect, rather than just correcting them, I often, and I know a lot of people do this, will write their incorrect sentence out on the whiteboard, on the classroom, and ask them, what word is missing, or that's the wrong way around, or something, and then they can correct. So that's a prop as well. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be big and bold. It can be small and simple, but it's just, rather than just sitting there, it's just you and the student. It gives them a better understanding, particularly with younger students. If you think you're teaching toys, or you're teaching them how to add the to a sentence, having a toy that they're learning about, having a flashcard with the word the, it just is another level of meeting how they may learn. It encourages participation. So one of the things I love doing, and again, it's very, very good for younger ones. Say you're teaching toys, so you're teaching teddy. So I'll get my teddy, and then I'll say, where's your teddy? And they love it. Even if they're a little bit shy, their mum or dad may well come and bring it to them, and they're there and they show you their teddy, and they'll remember that. They'll go away and they'll remember, this is a teddy bear, and I had fun with this. But even with older students, by using your whiteboard of different things, be inventive, think out the box. I'm sure there's props that I've never used that you will have thought of, and it will encourage that participation. And then because we're enthusiastic, they're enthusiastic. If we're having fun, 99% of the time, our students are having fun as well.
Yeah, I think that props can also help with relaxing the student. For example, you could use, like you said, a teddy bear, and you could do role play with it, just to break the ice, to help the student feel at ease, especially the little ones, then they would get their teddy and talk back to you, and you're getting them to use the language, participation. So I think props can be very useful. And for your older students, digital images, realia, actual like food, or if you're teaching the topic of fruit, have real fruit that you can show them. It helps with their overall comprehension, because they might have never heard the word banana, but they know what it is. So it's linking vocabulary with the actual items.
Definitely.
So props can be used, like you said, for any age group, of course, with having the age group in mind.
Yes, I was going to say that we need to adapt. So you would not want to have, I don't know, my toy banana, which is great for younger ones, or maybe even some younger teenagers, but for an adult student or like an older teenager, that could be a little bit patronizing. I think if I was, as an adult, someone was teaching me fruit and they had a toy banana, I might be a bit okay. But if I had a real banana or an image of one, so if you don't have to go and buy them, particularly if you haven't got bananas in your house, but if you have something, a real one. So for instance, when I'm teaching sports, so for children's, my images for sports are all cartoons. But for my teenagers and older, they're pictures of real football players and real basketball players. And it doesn't take long to do that. And it does help. It really adds the other element to our teaching. So now let's do a little poll. Oh, so I thought I'd press. So what are some don'ts for online teaching? So over to you, Rose.
So our poll today is, what are some don'ts for online teaching? So we have the option: don't use props and extra resources, don't overcomplicate, don't be late for lessons, don't show frustration or anger, and don't test any of your equipment.
And you can choose as many of those as you like. Okay, so all of those, apart from the very last one, are correct. Sorry, 3 of them. Sorry, I misread that then. Sorry. Sorry. So yes, we don't want to overcomplicate. We don't want to be late for lessons. We don't want to show frustration or anger, but we do want to use props and extra resources, and we do want to test our equipment. I'm so sorry, I misread it then. Okay. Oh. Okay. So let's go on to some don'ts. So 5 don'ts of online teaching. So these are things are essential that we do not do. Okay, so don't overtalk. Something I work on. When I first became an online teacher, my feedback was always really positive, but it was very often reduce that teacher talk time, which we have another webinar about in more detail. But why don't we overtalk? Because if we're talking, our students aren't. So it hinders their participation. We want to ask as many open-ended questions as possible. So rather than saying to your student at the beginning, did you have a good day today? And then they say yes or no. Okay, let's start the lesson. But you need to say, but why did you have a good day? What did you do today? And then you're participating with them right from the start, and you can keep doing this. Yes or no questions are absolutely fine, but not all the time. We want as many open-ended questions as possible. If we are talking too much, we could overwhelm our students, and then they will lose interest. Just as we said before, we've all been in those lessons or training or something in our life where we've experienced somebody talking so much that we don't remember anything they said in the end because we were overwhelmed and we were bored. And we never want that for our students. Yes, sorry.
Someone just asked a great question. They said, how can we keep our instructions to the point? What techniques can we add into our teaching to keep instructions and explanations to the point?
Okay.
So, yeah. No,
Okay.
no, it's fine.
Okay. So preparation is key. So think about the questions you're going to ask. If you know your material, you can think, okay, how am I going to extend on that? If they don't understand that instruction, how am I going to simplify that? What words can I leave out? What words could I replace that with? That's too long. I know that so-and-so won't understand that. Preparation, it's really all about preparation. It's also about knowing your students, which takes time. So one student may come and you may have an instant bond with them. They talk lots, they understand everything you say, and another student would be very shy, etc. And you just have to adapt according to them. So yes, preparation, and even taking notes, thinking if that worked, what doesn't work, asking somebody else, even trying it out, especially when you're new. If you have a family or a friend, you could say, does this make sense? If I say like this, does this make sense? Do you understand this? And if they know that you're talking too much, then that's a good indicator, things like that. Okay, so that really leads on to this one about not overcomplicating. So let's again ask, why do you think this is important that we don't overcomplicate? So this will be our instructions, our explanations, and anything overall.
Well, I would say, firstly, we are, teaching ESL students, so they already, on the back foot learning a second language, and that can be daunting on its own. So, having this overcomplicated lesson where they don't understand anything can just, really hinder their self-confidence. It can, they can become, just passive and don't want to learn anything. They can not participate. So all those things can add to overcomplicating a lesson by, maybe giving a lengthy explanation or using vocabulary they don't understand.
Yes, I think the one about vocabulary is very important. So if you're, as an ESL, if you're teaching grammar, there's some very complicated language associated with grammar, which even when I was doing my TEFL course, and my parents are English teachers, I came across so much grammar that I'd never heard of. In all honesty, I'm thinking, I'm never going to remember all of these terms, but you don't have to, as long as you know how to use it. And that's the same for our students, again, according to their ability. More able students or students with a lot more knowledge, you can be a little bit complicated, but you can give more in-depth explanations. But if you have a new student, whatever their age is, just like when we first started learning anything, it needs to be simple. And this is something that's ongoing. But as it really reiterates what you were saying, Rose, it will definitely negatively impact students' confidence. They'll very often become confused. And because of that, they shrink back and they don't want to participate because they feel we may make them feel a bit unintelligent or not clever enough. And we would never want to do that. And it's, again, this is something that preparation, again, is key, but it can happen. This happened to me just the other day, and I was well prepared for my lesson, but you go in and the student doesn't get the explanation that you think normally they would get. And I'm thinking, oh, I've said this and I thought I've overcomplicated this. So I will do something. I will just say, okay, hang on. No, I'm sorry. I'm going to start again. And that's okay, like a fresh start. So don't worry if it does happen, but stop it if it does. Recognize that it's happening.
Yeah, somebody just mentioned to always put yourself in the student's shoes, which is great.
Definitely.
That's great advice, because, for us being native English speakers, it can be so easy to overcomplicate things. So we should always just, think about, are they really understanding us? How would we feel in that situation of learning a different language and going into a classroom that is just like way out of our league, Yeah,
definitely. Always think, if I was my student, would I understand this? Have a think about it. Definitely. So number 3, don't be late for lessons. So why is this so important? It's negative image. It creates a negative image. It could come across as unprofessional. And when we're talking about being late for lessons, this is when something is in our control. So we have poor time management. It's not because our internet suddenly crashed or something we went well. It's and I'm not saying it's like a deliberate thing, but it's something that we could have controlled and we could have been on time. It's always a good idea to be in your classroom at least 2 minutes, 3 minutes before your lesson is about to start. This makes sure that you're there. You've got that time to check for anything. And we have to remember that we're providing a service. People are paying for this. So if we're late, how would that make you feel if you were paying for something and the person that you're paying for was continually late for no reason? So again, this is not for no valid reason. And you'll be unreliable. As an ESL teacher, you will see students come and go. So if you are unreliable, your students will be a lot more going than coming because they want that. And I was thinking about this earlier. Imagine how you'd feel if imagine how you do feel, sorry, as a teacher, you've gone to all this energy, time to prepare really well for your lesson. You've got all your props ready, you know how to explain things, and your student's really late. And there's no apology, they're just really late. You'd be frustrated, you'd be disappointed. Now, imagine how our student would feel. Maybe they've got all their homework ready. Maybe they've been looking forward to this lesson all day and you're late. Think about the impression that would give. What could it do to your students' self-confidence, and how could it frustrate and may make them and their parents who are paying for this, or themselves if they're older students, how will it make them feel? It's a very negative thing to do. And again, we're just talking about when it's in your control to not be late. Okay, so number 4, don't use inappropriate or complex language. So why would you not want to do this? It could offend our students. Students may struggle to understand it, and they may start using inappropriate language. So it's almost like when a young child says a bad word, the parent will say, where did you hear that from? Okay, so this could be the same. If we're using inappropriate language, well, then our students will think that's appropriate to use. So what sort of things could this include?
Well, I think it could just be topics that you shouldn't really be talking about in class, you know, with there being such a cultural difference between, you know, you as a teacher and then your student. Things that might be, you know, okay in our culture or in the teacher's culture might not be okay in the student's culture. So I think, and that can happen, you know, not intentionally, it can happen, but I think we need to be very careful and be as neutral as possible when, you know, discussing things that might be sensitive towards the student. And involves their culture, you know, the way of doing things in your country. And of course, you know, inappropriate language that shouldn't be used in a professional space at all. And it does happen, you know, things like that do happen. And students, you know, like we said in the previous webinar, they're like sponges, you know, they learn very quickly. And if you're constantly using that kind of language in a classroom, they're going to pick it up and they're going to start using it.
Yeah, absolutely. They definitely are. And you have to think about subjects that are maybe sensitive. So again, Rose mentioned about the culture. That shows it's imperative that you know your culture that you're teaching to. Things that, as Rose said, that maybe in England, South Africa, wherever you're from, is absolutely fine to talk about. But in China, India, South America, even other parts in England are not okay to talk about. You need to know that. You need to avoid things. For example, a worldwide pandemic. This is something you probably wouldn't want to bring up with your students in class because it could be very sensitive. You don't know what effect it may have already had on their family. What if it's something that they bring up? So they bring up a subject that you think this is not appropriate, we shouldn't be talking about this. Well, just don't engage with them. Acknowledge it, don't ignore them, acknowledge it and then move on. So we don't brush them aside, we don't say I'm not interested in that, but just acknowledging, oh, okay, oh, I'm sorry about that, but just move on. Because their parents, particularly if they're young, they may be there. And sometimes students, they're often very clever, and we need to know to adapt. No, you shouldn't be talking about this, and we're not going to talk about it, but do so kindly. Do maybe a bit of a joke if you can. Sense of humor is always great in those sorts of situations. So number 5, don't show frustration. So there is not a teacher on the planet, I don't believe, who has never felt frustration. So feeling frustration is fine. It's not okay to show it. It really isn't. But we've all probably sat on our hands or walked out of a classroom because we're frustrated. But why shouldn't we show it? Because it will impact negatively on our students' confidence. It will often cause them to disengage. This is something I've seen as a teaching assistant for years. I've seen this on the rare occasion when a teacher showed frustration. It can create a negative atmosphere. So remember, we talked about this fun, engaging, positive energy. If you're a teacher that gets frustrated, how do you think that's going to make your atmosphere in your classroom be? And it can really negatively affect our students' participation. So I've worked with students in real life classrooms, but also online, and you see maybe their parents showing frustration, which is hard to see. So imagine how you can see how that makes them feel, and it makes you feel bad. But imagine if that was us making them feel like that. Okay, so we can be firm, we can control behavior, but we don't show frustration. So if they're not understanding something, don't worry, think, hang on, how would I feel if my teacher back in the past shouted at me? And shouting is kind of the worst sort of thing. Or take some kind of verbal expressions, or maybe language that is completely inappropriate because of their frustration. Always look at your company for your company's policy and your company's support in that area if there's things you need to do, but keep calm and just think, okay, it's an online lesson. This will be over in probably half an hour, maybe an hour, and I'll have a new student, and they won't frustrate me. And there could be valid reason for you feeling frustrated. Maybe your student is refusing to engage. So we're not saying you shouldn't show frustration because there's no reason to. You may have absolutely every reason to know, I know this student can do this or that, but we just can't show it, as particularly online. We'd never want to negatively affect how our students feel about themselves. And if we don't show frustration, often, this is from my own personal experience, negative behavior tends to die down because they're not getting the reaction from you that they're seeking anyway. So they tend to, not always, but they do tend to come around and maybe engage a little bit more than they were. So let's look very quickly at some online versus in real life differences. So in a real life classroom, some key differences is your classroom management. So often you'll have many more students. In an online setting, you'll very often have one or two, maybe a small group, depending on your company or what you yourself are doing. Classroom, you'll probably have about 30, 32 children or more, depending on which country you're in, and your management of them will be very different. Your technology use, so many classrooms have interactive whiteboards, many classrooms have laptops with their students, tablets, all that. Again, you'd have to be aware of how to use all of that and how your students could use it and keeping up to date with it. Your content and materials may be different. So you may be physically able to give materials out to your students that you can't do in an online lesson. Your learning outcomes or aims tend to be for a whole classroom with individual targets. Online, it tends to be for just that one student or that small group of students that you're working with. Your teacher-student interaction is different. And as an online teacher, this is the one thing, the physical interaction, that I miss. So in real life, I miss being able to kind of pat somebody's head or give them a little elbow, so you've done really well. So you can find other ways to do that online. You can still do high fives. You can still kind of like do different like cheers, but that is the interaction is a little bit different. And planning and preparation, often for in real life classrooms, you plan for much further ahead than you do for an online. For a lot of online, you can just prepare for maybe one or two lessons, or even just a lesson the next day. In a classroom, you'll have to plan and prepare, maybe if you're a primary teacher, for example, for a whole day of teaching of different subjects. And the beauty is the flexibility. As a teacher in a real life classroom, you're in for throughout the term, it's set, those days are set. An online teacher, you can often set your own time, your own hours that you're able to work and adapt, particularly as Rose said, online teaching really gives you the opening to travel, so that flexibility, which is really quite special. Oh, sorry. Oh, press the right arrow too much. So also the flexibility of learning. Length of lessons, as we said before, you're going to run a student who's frustrating, think this is only going to be a short lesson. I will have a new student in a minute, or I'll have time for a coffee. Okay, or I'll have time to go and let my frustration out outside. Or you may even find actually a lot of my students, the lessons are so fast and it's already over, and it's like, oh no, but it's great because it's short, fast paced. And again, your student-teacher interaction is a little different, and the behavior. So often behavior can be very different online. A lot of children, because that's a choice that their parents are paying, their behavior, it depends. They can be, in my experience, often very well behaved, but again, because it's a choice, they could also not be. So they may feel because they haven't got classmates, they're not in that classroom situation, their behavior could be different than if they were sat at a desk as all their peers were. So how can the growth mindset benefit students who are learning online? So this is really referring back to our webinar from last week. So just to re-emphasize these points, they will have greater self-confidence because they're growing and learning. We're encouraging them to challenge themselves, to never be afraid of making mistakes. So they're happy to do that. They're not going to worry. They embrace those challenges. They adapt to changing situations. And this is the one that's very important. They're all important, but welcoming correction and feedback. So we want to be able to model that so our students have that as well. With our final point, how can we as teachers encourage a growth mindset in online lessons? Well, we should always praise efforts rather than intelligence. So there was that phrase last week, you tried your best. This implies that they can't do any better. By praising efforts, we're showing that every single thing they do, even if to them it's very small, maybe they wrote their name for the first time and we make a big deal out of it, they're not worried if they're not as intelligent as their classmate or not as intelligent as their brother or sister. You've recognized their effort. We always encourage students to work on their weaknesses, focus on their strengths, work on their weaknesses so they're not afraid to work on them, so they know they can grow. We compliment any effort, any progress, and we develop a classroom culture that values challenges, and we encourage self-reflection and feedback. So it's time for a Q&A. Anybody has any questions?
We have a question.
Okay.
And the question is, what kind of feedback can we expect from students? So I think I understand where this person's coming from. You know, when we are working with smaller or younger students, like what kind of feedback can they give us, you know, to really help us to improve our lessons and kind of maybe change things around, adapt materials, our way of teaching in our next lesson. So what kind of feedback can we expect from, you know, younger students that are maybe not able to give verbal feedback?
That's great. So I think one of the biggest ways for me personally, and in observing other people's lessons, is are they enjoying it? You can see from somebody's facial expression if they've not understood it, if they're bored, if they really liked something. So you put up your little penguin puppet or something, and you weren't even teaching penguins, but you were just dancing or something. They liked that. So you think that's my feedback. They like props. Or you used your toys and they had a face of, okay, they don't like toys, I won't use that prop. Or you tried something on the whiteboard, yeah, that really worked with them. They could then go do this, this, and this. So you can just gauge it. Sometimes it's nice to say, did you have fun at the end of your lesson? And children are generally quite honest, particularly younger ones. They'll be like, no. Quite often they may say that, but more often than not, if you've put all that effort in, they'll say yes. And you'll see when they come back, are they keen to see you? Are they less reserved than they were before? So what did you do differently in this lesson that's working this time? Things like that. I don't know about you, Rose, if you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That sums it up perfectly.
Okay.
Yeah, I think those are really good, you know, cues to use, because when a student is so young, they can't communicate with you. You know, they might know basic words. and they rely on repetition. So you know, you can't really expect them to give you much verbal feedback in that sense. So I think just all those points you've mentioned are a great way to know, you know, if they are enjoying the lesson. Maybe no, they're not. You know, what can I do differently? What did I do in this lesson that might have not worked so well? Because you can tell, you know, if your students engaged from the start of the lesson and then halfway through, you can tell when you lose them, you know. So I think that's great. Those are great points that you mentioned.
And it's important to remember that if you have a bad lesson, a lesson that you didn't think good, you haven't failed. It's think of that growth mindset. Accept that there was a mistake, accept that maybe one part of the lesson was not as good as you wanted it to be, and learn from it. Please don't go away and beat yourself up about it. I've been in lessons, teaching a lesson, thinking, oh, do you know what? This is going well. I'm quite pleased with this. And other lessons, I'm like, I stop the lesson and think, right, back to the blackboard. Where did I go wrong? Rather than, because I have done this in the past, that was awful, that was terrible. So we should never be afraid of failure. We don't fail. We only fail if we fail to grow. And if we fail to adapt and accept that feedback from our students, whether it's verbal, whether it's physical, however it is, we are all passionate. I think to be a good teacher, you are passionate about it, and it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to think that didn't work this time. I'll try this. I'll try that. Oh, that wouldn't, but it did work with that student, so I can use it with that one. So it's okay to make mistakes. That's absolutely fine. We can never be a perfect teacher. We're going to be a perfect teacher for any lesson. And I think that's the beauty of teaching. Learning never exhausts the mind, so you can always learn. And you can one of my job, and I'm sure Rose would agree, if you teach, you learn something new every week, every day. And that's the beauty of teaching. But you can always improve. But you can also always say, no, that was a good lesson. That was a great lesson today. And that's okay to do that as well. That's really important. It is really important. Okay, so we'll just finish with this quote from Bill Gates. He said that technology is just a tool. And in terms of getting the students working together and motivating them, the teacher is the most important, which is absolutely true. So we hope you've enjoyed our webinar today. We thank you for coming, and if you're watching it later, that's great too, and we hope that you enjoy it on our different channels. So thank you, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Rose.
Thank you.